Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Erin Barlow, the Adult Services Manager at the John McIntyre Library, and we are continuing our community conversations. Tonight, we did the 4-part series earlier on race. We have one coming up soon on how to tell fake news, do your own research, and get informed opinions. So please look for that. That's in October as well. But right now, we're doing voting. Voting what we need to know in the age of COVID, what we need to know in general, from Rita, who is with the League of Women Voters. And I think she's got a lot to say, and it's an important election, so I think this will be good. Lots of facts, lots of interesting stuff. So.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Heather, for helping get this set up. It's a really different year, I think, for elections. I've never had a year in which we had so many questions coming at us. We've had a voter services booth at the Granville Farmers Market for the last 2 weeks. People just asking all kinds of questions, and I get calls all the time. So it's a kind of stressful year, I think, for all of us. My talk today is going to be structured around the 3 ways that you can vote. And we're lucky in Ohio that we really have a big opportunity to vote. Nobody should use the excuse that, well, they didn't have an opportunity, because we have lots of opportunities in 3 different ways. You can vote in person on election day. You can vote in person early at the Board of Elections, and you can vote absentee. And each of those ways has different advantages and disadvantages. So it really pays to study the options, these 3 options, pick the one that works for you, and then follow through and actually vote using that plan that you've developed. So I'm going to share my first screen here, which is this wonderful site provided by the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State is the person who does all the oversight of the 88 boards of election in Ohio counties, Secretary LaRose. And he has a wonderful website here that voters should really know, because it's just full of information that you can use. For example, what hits us first of all in our eyeballs here is this date to register by October 5th. And before we can really talk about these 3 ways of voting, we do need to address voter registration, because there's this very close deadline looming. What is that, Monday, I think, October the 5th? Anyway, it's coming up very soon. And if you need to update your registration, check whether you are registered or register for the first time, that's the deadline, and it's coming up. So you're advised here tonight to do this online. You can do these things in paper at the Board of Elections or elsewhere, but you can also register to vote online or update your registration online. And some people may not, some people I don't think realize that every time you move, you really need to update your registration with the Board of Elections. If you get married and change your name, you need to get that straightened out with the Board of Elections, so that when you show up to vote, wherever that is, or you vote absentee, those ducks are in a row. Let's look here at check your registration. Some people may not even remember, like, what address was I living at when I registered? So I'm going to do this right now with my own name and my own county. It would be similar for you in Muskingum. So my name is Rita, last name Kipp, and my county is Licking. This is how you check to see, am I registered? Where do they think I live? And you can see that they think I live at 145 Denison Drive, and that is where I live. Okay, I'm good. If you click on your name in this little box, it tells you some other useful information, like where you go to vote, where your polling location is. If you've never voted before, or if you're new to town, you may not know that, and here's where you check. It also tells you down here some districts that you vote in. Both Muskingum and Licking County are in U.S. Congressional District 12. So that will be on our ballots this fall. So I should say that when you register online, you will need 2 forms of ID. You'll be asked to provide the last 4 digits of your social security number and your driver's license number. If you register or update your registration on paper, you only need 1 of those. But for online, you're going to need 2. So, you know, get your ducks in a row before you get into the online form. Be sure you have those numbers there. I, for one, have never memorized my driver's license number. I would have to write these down. And I think those are the main sources of information that you'll need to have at hand. Okay, so let's start with those 3 options for voting. And we're going to start with voting on Election Day. It's right here in the middle of this screen, and you can see that you can also find your polling location here. There's more than one way to find where your polling location is. Why that's important is if you show up to vote on Election Day and you're not in the precinct or the polling place that has been assigned to you, then you'll probably be asked to vote a provisional ballot. Either that or they'll say, hey, you're in the wrong place. You're supposed to be voting at the Presbyterian Church, and so you'll have to go down there. Either way, it's a hassle. And it's a hassle on a day when you may have been standing in line and had to get a babysitter to get there. So, you know, it's just not worth it. Check that you know where your polling place is before you get ready to go vote on Election Day. Also under here, there are some safety precautions. I'm not going to click on those, but I can tell you that this will be a different year for those of us who are poll workers. I haven't actually been to the training yet, but I believe they're going to tell us how to wipe down machines, that we're going to be prepared for keeping spacing in the lines that form on Election Day. And think about it, this is supposed to be a record turnout. So record turnout, and we have to reduce the number of people in the polling place by spreading out these lines. Keep this in mind because there may be a wait. You may have to wait to vote on Election Day. And you should wear a mask out of courtesy to everybody else as well as your own safety. Actually, if you show up without a mask, the polling workers have to let you vote, but they'll get you in and out of there as quick as possible. And it'd be just easier if you save everybody a little fluster by, in fact, wearing a mask when you go to your polling place. I wanted to share a screen here with vote for voters who may not have voted before. Sometimes we get, you know, brand new 18-year-olds who are voting for the first time. If you show up on Election Day to vote, you're going to be voting on a machine. This is just a part of what it looks like. When you check in and the poll worker pulls up your name in the electronic polling book and sees that your ID is valid, then they will hand you a piece of paper that looks like this long skinny sheet here. You insert that into a voting machine, and that's what records your votes. At the end, when you hit done or submit, it spits that back out at you. I would advise you to look at it. It's a record. It's a record of how you voted. You can't keep it, but as you're walking with it over to the place where you deposit that sheet of paper, and that place is probably going to look like a big garbage can with something fancy on the top. I think it has a scanner on the top or a screen or something, but it's basically a big garbage can appearing thing. And that's where all the votes go on Election Day to be stored and counted later by machine. The machines are not that hard to figure out, especially for those of us these days who are familiar with computers and all. But if something is not clear, if you have a question, you should definitely speak up and ask one of the poll workers, how does this work? Or what am I supposed to do now? I mean, they're just standing around hoping that somebody will make them feel useful. So please speak up if you do have a question about how to vote by machine. I should also say here that, let's get back to that wonderful site from the Secretary of State, that you need to show up on voting day, on election day, with correct identification. And I'm going to click on this because it's essential. ID requirements. The valid kinds of ID. Again, this is something you need to really think about and plan ahead so that you're sure you have it when you go to your polling place. As a poll worker, I can tell you that now and then, usually at least one every election, somebody will show up with a passport. You would think that a passport, which has your photograph and it's obviously an official, government document, would work. Passport is not valid ID for the purpose of voting. And why is that? Because it doesn't have your address. And as we've talked about, in terms of where your polling place is and so on, everything hinges on your residential address in this system. So if at your polling place, they determine that something's off with your address, or you're not living where you said you were living, then that will come up as a question. So you need forms of identification like a driver's license, which has both a residential address, a photo, and so on. The driver's license is quite possibly the most common form of ID. You only need one form of ID that's valid. And probably 95% of voters use a driver's license, but not all voters have a driver's license. So you can also use other things. You can use a military ID. You can even use a utility bill. You can use a bank statement, a paycheck. Those, you don't see those as often, but they are valid forms of ID. They'll have your address on them. Okay. I talked about the safety protocols. One final thing about voting in person on election day. It's okay to take notes with you. It's okay to take a little sheet with things written down that you want to remember. In fact, the parties, Democrats, Republicans, Green, whatever, will often provide you with a postcard or a sheet of some kind that says, here's the candidates that we endorse, our party endorses. And there might be a lot of them. And so it's okay to take that list in if you want to vote, if you want to take those recommendations. Notice that there are a lot of judges that we're voting for in this election. And judges run in the primary as members of parties. You vote for them on a party ballot. You declare your party. But when it comes to the general election, they're running as nonpartisan candidates. So there's no indication on your ballot whether somebody running for the Supreme Court or in Ohio or the District Appellate Court or whatever court, there's no indication of what their party is. If party matters to you, then take in your little cheat sheet and vote for the judges whose values reflect yours. Let me also share with you a screen that talks about write-in candidates. This is the list of candidates that the Muskingum Board of Election has put out for its voters. And I've highlighted here the places on this list of candidates that have write-ins. You can see right there in the presidential list that there are a number of people who are writing in. Hope that you will write their name and vote for them for president instead. You also have a race down here, coroner. And you've got one guy who is a regular, verified candidate, and you've got somebody who is a write-in. Now, this candidate list shows you their names. But when you show up to vote on election day, these names will not appear on the ballot. These write-in names will not appear on the ballot. You can ask a poll worker, do you have a list of the write-in candidates? And they can show them to you. But they don't show them to you unless you ask. And so if you are keen to vote for Tom Hoofling, Andy Pryor for president and vice president as write-in candidates, then you better write down that name so that you'll know how to deal with it at the voting machine. At the voting machine, you write in a candidate by clicking on the write-in, line, and then a keypad comes up. I can't remember whether it's touchscreen, probably it's touchscreen. And you just poke in, you spell out TOM space, whatever. So you write in the candidate's name by typing on a screen. Write-in candidates, some people think, well, I'll just write in the name of my dog or, Mickey Mouse or something like that. Write-in candidates are not, it's not open season. Only those who have been verified, certified, either by the Secretary of State or by your Board of Elections will count. You can write in any name you want, but the only person that your Board of Elections will count as a write-in candidate for coroner is this guy down here, Charles. So you might want to take a list of the write-in candidates if you're keen to vote for any of them. Okay, so that's voting at the polls on election day. Let's go to the second kind of voting that's possible, and that is early voting in person at your Board of Election. And in many ways, it's very similar to voting at your polling place. Your Board of Election, by the way, if you don't know, is at 627 Market Street in Zanesville. And they're set up there with machines exactly like you'll see at the polling place, exactly like the picture I showed you, the same system. Let's look at when you can vote early, because this is one of the impressive things about voting in Ohio. Let's see, where do I find that? I'm sorry, I seem to have lost the machine I want to share. Let's go back and see if I can get to it from here. Yes, I can. So here's the vote early in-person section of the Secretary of State website. And let's look at the schedule. There's a calendar there. We'll go right past September. We can go right past, no, we can't go past October. We're in October. And this navy blue line down here across the calendar shows you when early voting happens. It's interesting that the deadline to register to vote is on the 5th, and the very next day after that deadline ends, early voting starts. So you go to your Board of Election, you vote by machine, and the hours are very generous. You have to kind of study them because there are different hours on different days, but in some days, for example, they stay open until 6 or 7 o'clock. So if you're a working person who can't get there from 9 to 5, you can go after work. And even better, there's early voting on the weekends, in some weekends, not all of them. But on Saturdays and Sundays, you can, for example, Sunday the 1st, early in-person voting, 1 to 5. Sometimes churches load up buses of people and take souls to the polls on in election season to vote early at that time. This is really a very generous early voting schedule we have in Ohio. So, you should be able to find a time that works for you. Sometimes people can't show up on November the 3rd, election day, one day. But if you have 28 days and a range of hours, including weekends, you can find a time to vote. And voting early is a good option. When you get there, you'll no doubt find, again, these requirements that reflect the pandemic. The lines for early voting, which there are sometimes, will be longer, or you'll have to wait longer because you have to space out 6 feet apart in that line. Okay, we've done voting on election day, we've done early voting at the Board of Elections. We're down to the third form of voting available to Ohio voters, and that is absentee voting. And it's the hardest one. I saved the hardest until the end because it's a little more complicated. Let me get back to that shared screen. My sharing is, there we go. Okay. The vote by absentee ballot, there's a whole row here about that subject. I'm clicking on the header in that list of things. And I should start by saying that there are 2 steps to absentee voting in Ohio. You have to apply or request to vote absentee. That's the first step. Then you get the ballot by mail and you send it back, either by mail or at a dropbox at the Board of Elections. So there's that 2-step process, but it begins with applying. And here, the Secretary of State spells out ways to request or apply to vote absentee. Now, I need to clarify that this is in fact a paper process. You can certainly go online and find an electronic form and you can print it out, print on it, or you can even fill it out online and print it out, having typed into the form. But ultimately, it's a paper form that you have to return by mail or by Dropbox to the Board of Election. Now, I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news, but there's kind of scary things they're saying about the mail these days. Is it going to be slowed down because of the volume of absentee voting or because of changes at the top in the Postal Service? These are kind of worries we have. You should know that applying to vote absentee has a deadline of October 31st. Well, you think, that's still a long ways away. This is just the 1st of October that we're doing this thing. So October 31st, but given the whole logistics of getting your application, filling it out, sending it back, waiting till your ballot shows up, mailing that back, you really don't have time to spare here. Instead of thinking, what's the deadline? What's the last day I can wait to do this? Think, what can I do now? Because actually, if you plan to vote absentee, I think you should do it now. It's not too early. So read these options here carefully about how you get it. Perhaps the easiest one really is, look here on number 2, you can call your Board of Elections and request an application. That's going to be perhaps the quickest way at this point in time. Find out the number of your Board of Elections there in Zanesville, give them a call and say, would you please send me a request or an application to vote absentee? And that may be quicker than these other options, but whatever works for you. If you don't have a printer at home, that may be a better option than trying to go through one of these other options here, 1 or 2. So the first step is applying to vote absentee. And then the second step is actually to do it. There is a very handy feature here though. Track your ballot. Now I'm going to again use myself as an example. You'll see a map there that's supposedly clickable, but in fact it doesn't work that well. I'm going to click on my county. You would click on yours. So Licking County. And I'm going to show you how this works. Again, you put in your name. You don't need your address or anything here. And submit that. And look what shows up. You find out that, well, first you find out I'm pretty old. But you also find out, again, where I live. And that my application to vote absentee was processed back in September. And look, now I'm in the system as mail absentee, mail/absentee. What this means is that if I show up to vote in person on election day, having requested an absentee ballot, they're going to know that. And they're going to ask me to vote a provisional ballot instead of a regular ballot. Now, a provisional ballot is fine. It's something, sometimes you have to do it, but it's not something I would recommend to anybody because it's paperwork you have to go through at the polls. And if you vote a provisional ballot, sometimes you have to go to the Board of Election in the next week and straighten out some issue or something. So try to avoid voting a provisional ballot. If you have requested an absentee ballot, I recommend that you just go ahead and use it. Fill it out, drop it in the Dropbox, or mail it in. But don't change your mind, don't change your plan in midstream and try to vote in person, having already put yourself in the books as an absentee voter. Because how do they know you're not going to vote twice? And by the way, voting more than once is a felony. All right, so you've learned how to track your ballot. You've learned how to track your ballot application. Actually, that same link up there will work once you receive your ballot at your home address, and you fill it out and you mail it back. You think, did they get it? Was it lost in the mail? Have they processed it? That same link will help you track your ballot. And apparently, there is a tracking number on the ballot. And so if you write that down before you send that thing off, or maybe just, whatever, make a copy of it or take a photo on your phone so that you know that tracking number, it might be easier then to track where your ballot actually is. The ballots will be mailed out to us just after October 6th. That's a date we've heard before. That's the first day of early voting. So the Board of Election will send me my absentee ballot. I don't know exactly when, it may be the 7th or 8th or whatever, shortly after October the 6th. Now I want to show something to you and show you why, one of the reasons why this paper process is more hazardous to voters. The hazard is that it's easier to make mistakes. You have to be very careful not to make silly little clerical errors, the kind of silly clerical errors we all make. Forgetting to sign something, spacing out and putting your birth date where you should put today's date, or vice versa, whatever. There's room for error. So let's see if I can pull up a picture of what you're going to face. Where is it? This is what the Dropbox looks. I was going to share that with you earlier. This is what the Dropbox looks like in Licking County. Yours will look something like this. This has a Licking County seal on it. You can put your absentee applications or your voted ballots in that box. It's there 24 hours a day. I think there's a security camera on it at all times. And in terms of returning your ballots, that works all the way through. I had a picture of, I'm not going to be able to find it here, but I have a picture of the ID envelope for returning your absentee ballot. You'll get this ballot in the mail along with the exterior envelope that it goes in and an interior envelope that the ballot itself goes in. You've got an envelope in an envelope. And the envelope that's inside the bigger envelope is your ID envelope, and it has 5 sections that you have to fill out. Your name, your address, birth date, it asks you for your ID there. There's a signature line. And then over on the right-hand side of that envelope, this is just an envelope you're writing all this stuff on by hand. There's a place for you to put contact information, your phone or an email, and I advise everyone to include that. It's sort of optional, but really, if they run into any kind of a snag, they can email you, they can call you, whatever the snag is. Your signature doesn't match, your address is wrong, you forgot to sign, or whatever. So this is a kind of insurance that all those little ducks are in a row, that you've really done everything you need to do. It's an insurance that your vote will actually count and not be thrown out because of some silly little error that we all make. I think that I've gotten to the end of what I was going to say about voting, the 3 ways of voting. There was one more thing I was going to share with you. Again, for some reason, all my shared screen conversations are not showing up where I want them to. But there is a website called vote411.org. And that website is maintained by the League of Women Voters at the national level and at state levels and on down and down. Anybody anywhere can put their address in there and see a list of the races that are on their ballot. But only if you have a local league working do you actually get those, those candidates filled in. So what you'll see as a person in Muskingum County now, you'll see the presidential profiles. You can compare Biden and Trump, as if we all didn't have enough to compare already on that race. Especially after the debate the other night, huh? But, you can compare the candidates for congressional district. You can compare Troy Balderson with Elena Shearer, who is opposing him as a Democrat in Congressional District 12. What you'll not be able to see is what voters in Licking County can see, because they do have a local League of Women Voters. And that is the lower races down the ballot, 2 guys who are competing to be county commissioner, people running for sheriff. Those are important people in our lives. And it helps to be able to look at those candidate profiles and compare them. You can array them side by side, 2 candidates. You can see their pictures, you can see their education, you can see what work experience they've had, and you can see how they answer questions. The questions for the District 12 race, for example, the Congressional District 12, are questions about how they feel about climate change and protecting air and water resources, how they feel about health care. I forget what the third question is. Oh, what they would do to prepare for a pandemic should another one come along. So it's interesting to read these. And again, you read them and you carefully think, which of these candidates reflects my values? League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. We never promote a particular candidate or a party, but we want voters to be informed and make choices that reflect their interests. So I think that's about it. I'm disappointed in myself for not having all my screen shares lined up here tonight. But if nothing else, I hope you learn to use the website of the Secretary of State. And that's a real go-to source. You make a bookmark on that one during election season and go to it again and again. So thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here tonight, and I hope this has been of value to you.